Experience the kinetic energy of neon lights in motion, where every flicker tells a story of survival, ambition, and deep desire. Our 3D visuals take you into the heart of the storm, where the city never sleeps. Hit subscribe now and keep up with the rhythm of the future.
Walked out of a building you basically kept running for 6 years? Not fired. Walked out. Like you're a security risk. Like the woman who built the inventory reconciliation system from scratch on a Tuesday night because the vendor's tool kept throwing false negatives. Like that person needs an escort to make sure she doesn't steal a stapler. That was me. Friday, March 14th, 7:17 p.m. I remember the time because I'd just finished my second coffee and was about to send a report to the regional warehouse team. The kind of report that took me 2 days to build and would have saved them about 40 hours of manual entry every week. I never sent it. My manager's manager, I'll call him my skip level because that's the polite version of what I called him later, knocked on my office door with HR behind him. Not our normal HR person. Someone I'd never seen before. Brought in for the occasion, I guess. She had a lanyard and a clipboard and the expression of someone who had done this 11 times that week and had yoga at 6. My skip level said the company was restructuring the operations support function. He said my role was being consolidated. He said I was a valued contributor and they wished me well. He did not make eye contact once. The woman with the clipboard handed me a folder. Severance agreement. 2 weeks. For 6 years. I said, "Can I have a minute?" She said, "We'll need your badge before you leave the floor." I looked at my screen. The reconciliation report was still open. 6 years of institutional knowledge sitting in a spreadsheet tab that no one else knew how to read. I thought about saying something. I thought about explaining what would happen if no one ran the month-end close process the way I ran it. I thought about a lot of things in about 4 seconds. Then I closed my laptop, picked up my coffee mug, the one my daughter painted at one of those ceramic studios. And I said, "Okay." They walked me to the elevator. The woman with the clipboard took my badge at the door. My skip level shook my hand like we'd just finished a mediocre lunch meeting. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, stared at the parking garage ceiling for probably 3 minutes. Then I drove home and cried in my driveway for about 20 minutes because I'm a human being and that's what human beings do. I should tell you who I am because context matters. My name is Shelby. I'm 41. I spent 6 years as a Senior Operations Analyst at a mid-sized distribution company, the kind that moves consumer goods from regional warehouses to retail stores across the Mid-Atlantic. Nothing glamorous. A lot of spreadsheets. A lot of warehouse managers calling me at 7 a.m. because something wasn't reconciling and they had a truck leaving in 40 minutes. I was good at my job, not in a brag about it way. In a the work speaks for itself way that, as it turns out, is a terrible strategy when nobody's actually watching the work. The thing about operation support is that you're invisible when things go well. Nobody sends a congratulations email when the inventory counts match. Nobody throws a party when the vendor invoices reconcile on the first pass. You only hear about your work when something breaks, and because I made sure things didn't break, I heard about my work almost never. That was my mistake. Not the only one, but the biggest one. The other thing you should know, about 8 months before I got walked out, the company hired a new VP of operations. I'll call him my new VP, because I never fully trusted him with the kind of shorthand that implies familiarity. He came from a bigger company. He had an MBA and strong opinions about streamlining and right-sizing the support function. He wore expensive sneakers to the office and used the word leverage as a verb in every single meeting. Within a month, he'd hired 2 of his own people. Within 3 months, he'd reorganized the reporting structure so that my team reported to one of his people instead of directly to the operations director. Within 6 months, he was in conversations with a third-party analytics firm about outsourcing the data function. I raised concerns, politely, professionally, in writing. My concerns were noted. Then, on March 14th, they consolidated my role. I didn't call anyone that weekend. I needed to think clearly, and I couldn't do that while managing other people's reactions. Sunday night, I made a list. Not a revenge list, just an honest accounting of what I knew and what they didn't know they were missing. 6 years of institutional knowledge doesn't disappear when you hand over a badge. It just becomes a problem they haven't discovered yet. The list was long. The month-end close process. I ran it every single month. I had a 47-step checklist I'd built over 4 years, refining it every time something broke. That checklist lived in a SharePoint folder under my name. I was the only one who knew every step by heart. The new team had watched me do it once, maybe twice. The vendor reconciliation logic. We had 3 major fulfillment vendors, and each of them sent data in a slightly different format. I had built translation tables in Excel that converted their outputs into our system's required format. Those translation tables were labeled with my initials and stored in a shared drive that my skip level had probably never opened. The escalation contacts. 6 years of relationship building with warehouse supervisors, logistics coordinators, trucking dispatchers, real phone numbers. Real people who called me by name and trusted me to solve problems without going through 5 layers of ticketing systems. Those relationships were mine. They weren't in any CRM. The quarterly compliance report. We submitted it to a third-party auditor every quarter, a requirement tied to a state contract we held. I had built the report template. I knew the auditor's preferences. I knew that she hated when the footnotes used a different font than the body text, and I knew that our system exported data in a way that required manual cleanup before it could go into the report, and I had a macro that did that cleanup in about 30 seconds. Nobody else knew about the macro. Nobody else knew about any of it, really, because I was good at my job in the quiet way, and I had never made it anyone else's problem, and that had felt like professionalism for 6 years. It was only sitting at my kitchen table on a Sunday night, with a glass of wine and a yellow legal pad, that I started to understand what that kind of quiet professionalism had actually cost me. I didn't send the severance agreement back right away. I had until April 4th to sign. 2-week severance, release of all claims, standard stuff. My brother-in-law is an employment attorney, and he looked it over for me, said it was a pretty thin package for 6 years, but nothing unusual. Said I could try to negotiate. I said I'd sit on it for a bit. The week of March 24th, I updated my LinkedIn, quietly, not announcing anything, just making sure my profile reflected current reality. I reached out to a few contacts, started thinking about what came next. March 28th, a Friday, my personal cell rang. Number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was from someone in HR, not the woman with the clipboard, a different one. She left a very professional message asking me to call back at my earliest convenience regarding a transition-related question. I called my brother-in-law first. He said, "Don't call back without knowing what they want." I agreed. I sent an email instead asking her to share the nature of the inquiry so I could prepare accordingly. She replied within an hour. The reply was careful and a little desperate in the way that careful corporate emails sometimes are when they're trying not to say what they're actually saying. The gist was, there were some questions about the Q1 compliance report. Could I help clarify the process? Q1 compliance report, due April 15th, the one that went to the state auditor, the one built in my template, the one that required the macro. I sat with that email for about 4 hours. Here's what I should tell you, and I want to be honest about it because I think a lot of stories like this skip over the part where the person who got wronged wasn't entirely without fault. I knew, when I left, that the compliance report was coming. I knew nobody else fully understood the process. I had thought about documenting it more thoroughly, had actually started a handoff document the previous fall, before the restructuring conversation started, when I still thought my job was secure. But I hadn't finished it, partly because I got busy, partly because, if I'm honest, there was a small part of me that had let the documentation slide because I knew it made me harder to replace. I'm not proud of that. It wasn't calculated sabotage. It was just the slow, self-protective logic of someone who could feel the ground shifting under her feet. That doesn't make what they did okay, but it's part of the story and it matters. I thought about all of this while I sat with that email. Then I thought about the fact that they'd escorted me out of a building I'd dedicated 6 years to, that they'd handed me 2-week severance and a form to sign, that my skip level hadn't looked me in the eye. I thought about what my brother-in-law had said, know what you have before you give it away. I opened my laptop and wrote back. I told her I was happy to discuss the compliance report process. I told her that given the circumstances of my departure, I wanted to make sure we approached this in a way that was fair to everyone. I told her I thought the most appropriate path forward would be a formal consulting engagement, scope to be defined, rate to be agreed upon before any work began. I kept the email to 4 sentences, proofread it 3 times, sent it. The response came back in 40 minutes, which told me everything I needed to know about how much trouble they were in. She said she'd loop in my skip level and get back to me. My skip level called me the next morning. Saturday, 8:52 a.m. He was friendly, warmer than I'd ever heard him. Asked how I was doing. I said I was well. He said he was sorry things had worked out the way they did, that the restructuring had been a difficult decision and he wanted me to know it wasn't a reflection of my performance. I said I appreciated that. He said they were hoping I might be willing to come in and spend a few hours with the new team just to walk them through the Q1 process. He framed it as a favor. He used the word informally twice. I said I understood what they were looking for, and I wanted to help, and I thought a consulting agreement was the right structure for that kind of engagement. He paused. Then he said, "We're kind of in a bind here, Shelby." I said, "I know." Another pause, longer this time. I had thought the night before about what number felt right. Not punitive. I wasn't trying to destroy anyone. But fair. Fair for what the knowledge was worth. Fair for what the situation was worth. Fair for what the situation was worth. Fair for 6 years of invisible work that had never been properly compensated. I named a day rate. It was 3 times my previous equivalent daily rate. I said I was available for up to 3 days of consulting, remote only, and that I'd need the agreement signed before any calls were scheduled. He said he'd need to check with the new VP. I said, of course, take your time. The April 15th deadline is a fixed date, though, so the sooner the better. I spent that Saturday doing laundry and watching a home renovation show and trying not to check my phone every 11 minutes. I was not entirely successful. The new VP emailed me directly at 4:30 p.m. The email was longer than it needed to be. It covered a lot of ground about mutual benefit and professional relationships and the value of institutional knowledge. It took 6 paragraphs to say, "We'll do the consulting agreement." They came back on the rate. Tried to get me to half it, framed as standard contractor rates for this type of engagement. I wrote back and said my rate reflected the specialized nature of the knowledge and the timeline constraints. I did not budge. They accepted the rate on Monday morning. The agreement was signed Tuesday. I had my brother-in-law look it over. He said it was clean, nothing unusual. 3 days of consulting at my rate, remote, deliverables defined as verbal walkthroughs and written process documentation. I started Wednesday. The first call was with the new team. 2 analysts who'd been brought in under the new VP's reorganization. They were fine, not their fault. They'd been handed a process they didn't understand and a deadline that didn't care. I walked them through the compliance report from beginning to end. I shared my screen. I showed them the macro. I explained the auditor's preferences, the font thing, the footnote formatting, the specific way she liked variance explanations written. I answered every question they had. It took about 4 hours across 2 days. I also wrote up a full process document, 43 steps, clearly labeled, with screenshots. I wrote it the way I wished someone had written something like it for me when I started. The 3rd day I was on a call when the new VP joined unexpectedly. He was polite, said he appreciated my willingness to help, said the team had told him the sessions had been really valuable. I said I was glad. He said, and I want to give him credit for this because it surprised me. He said, "I want to be honest with you. I don't think the transition was handled well. I think we lost more institutional knowledge than we realized." I said, "That happens sometimes." He said, "Yeah." There was a pause that wasn't exactly comfortable but wasn't hostile either. Then he said, "Is there any chance you'd be interested in a longer engagement? We have some other process gaps I think you'd be well positioned to address." I want to tell you I said something sharp and satisfying here, something that landed. But the truth is I said I'd think about it, because I had thought, over those 2 weeks since the parking garage, about what I actually wanted. Not in the abstract justice sense. In the real, practical sense. I wanted to be compensated fairly for work that had been undervalued. I wanted to choose my projects. I wanted to work without someone managing me by anxiety and reorganization. I wanted to pick up my daughter from school on Thursdays. I did not want to go back to being invisible. I told the new VP I was open to a longer engagement under the right terms. I sent a proposal the following week. Scope defined, rate defined, deliverables defined. Reporting structure that bypassed my skip level entirely. They came back with some adjustments. We went back and forth twice. It took about 10 days. We signed in late April. I won't pretend everything wrapped up in a bow. My skip level and I were never going to be close. The 2 weeks of original severance, which I did sign, felt thin regardless of what came after. The new VP was probably going to keep making decisions I'd disagree with. But I was billing at 3 times my old day rate, working from home 3 days a week, and I had the kind of leverage that comes from being the person with the answers instead of the person hoping someone noticed the questions. The Q1 compliance report went to the auditor on April 14th. I heard from one of the analysts that she'd approved it without revisions. First time that had happened in 2 years. Nobody sent me a congratulations email. But by then, I didn't need one. If I could tell you one thing, it's this: the invisible work isn't the problem. The problem is making yourself so invisible that when they look around, they don't understand what they're looking at. Document everything. Not to protect your job. You might not be able to protect your job. Document it so that when the conversation shifts, you're the one who knows where all the lights are. And if you get walked out of a building on a Friday afternoon by someone with a clipboard and a lanyard, don't give them everything they need to replace you before you know what you're getting in return. Sit in your car for 3 minutes. Go home. Cry if you need to. I did. Make your list. Then answer their email in 4 sentences. I've thought a lot about what actually happened here, not the logistics of it. The emails, the rate negotiation, the signed agreement, the thing underneath all of that. For 6 years, I did good work and told myself that was enough, that the work would speak for itself, that people who paid attention would notice. And some of them did notice. But only after I was gone, and only because the absence made the shape of everything I'd been doing suddenly visible in a way it never was when I was there doing it. That's the part that sits with me. Not the injustice of being walked out, not the 2 weeks of severance for 6 years of showing up. Those things were real and they stung, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But the deeper thing, the thing I had to actually reckon with, was that I had participated in my own invisibility. I'd built systems and processes and relationships and then kept them quietly to myself, like a kind of hoarding, and told myself it was professionalism when some of it was just fear. Fear that if I shared everything I knew, I'd become replaceable. Fear that documenting my own work too thoroughly would hand someone a roadmap to the exit door. What I didn't understand then is that the exit door was always there. They found it anyway. The only thing my silence protected was their ability to panic. There's something clarifying about sitting in a parking garage after you've just been walked out of a building you kept running for 6 years. You stop performing. You stop managing how you look. You just sit there and think about what's real. And what was real was that I had more to offer than I'd been paid for, and more leverage than I'd ever used, and more options than I'd been allowing myself to see, because I'd been so focused on being indispensable quietly that I'd never learned to be valuable loudly. The intelligence piece wasn't about knowing more than everyone else. I don't think I was the smartest person in any room I was ever in. The intelligence was in finally reading the situation clearly, understanding that the call I got on a Saturday morning at 8:52 wasn't a courtesy. It was a confession. They needed me more than the severance agreement suggested, and knowing that changed everything about how I showed up to the conversation. The ethics part is the one I want to be honest about, because I think it gets lost in stories like this. I wasn't entirely without fault. I let documentation slide. I protected institutional knowledge partly out of self-interest. I'm not saying that made what they did right. I'm saying that integrity means accounting for your own role in a situation, not just the other person's. I didn't sabotage anyone, but I also wasn't as generous with my knowledge as I could have been. The consulting engagement gave me a chance to actually be generous, to write the 43-step document, to explain the auditor's preferences, to hand things over completely. That felt better than the revenge version would have. And the resilience part, the part I'm most proud of, is that I cried in my driveway for 20 minutes and then I made a list. That's it. That's the whole secret. You feel what you feel and then you pick up a pen. Nobody is coming to notice your work. You have to make it noticeable. Not by being loud, not by playing politics, but by understanding your own value clearly enough that when the moment comes, and the moment always comes, you can name it without flinching. Sit in your car, make your list, answer the email in 4 sentences.